Welcome to RealtyCast Global, where we bring insights and advice from top professionals in the global market. Join us for a journey of culture and real estate from countries across the globe. My guest today is Uli Leib, an accomplished international relocation professional. Ms. Leib is from Austria and has traveled extensively throughout Europe. She currently resides in the skylines of the Chicago area. She specializes in cultural training, international relocation management, business development initiatives, and real estate consulting. Most recently, she has been working as an independent destination consultant and intercultural coach for international families moving to the Chicago area. Uli, welcome to the show. I appreciate you joining us this morning. So we'll jump right into the questions, and I want to ask one that some people may not understand or may want to understand better, and it's, can you give us some general background about corporate international relocation, and why do companies send employees to an overseas location?
All right, well, thanks for having me. You know what, most corporations with worldwide locations transfer employees between different countries. And the reason for sending someone to a different country, there can be many reasons. So one example would be a short-term project-based assignment. People, let's say, for example, an oil company starts drilling in a new location. They need a lot of employees there, so they bring them from another location, maybe where they just ended drilling. They may start a new operation in a country, like, for example, a U.S. company starts up a factory in China, so they will send some leadership over there to hire local employees and train them. Or, you know, Toyota, for example, opens a factory here in the U.S., they will send some folks in leadership roles from Japan over here to hire people and train them. Could be technical needs, like Silicon Valley, high-tech companies can't find the talent here, or they need to bring in from overseas. And sometimes it's talent development. That means that the company has a very high potential employee. They may bring him from overseas to their headquarters in the US, or they may send a U.S. employee somewhere overseas to give them that international experience to help them step up the ladder to their new role.
For how long do those employees typically stay in host countries?
Well, you know, it really depends on the need and the type of assignment. So if you have, for example, the oil company that's going to send people for drilling, they might go there for 3 months and live there, and then 3 months on, 3 months off, because it's usually sort of a hardship location. If we're talking a more traditional international assignment, it could be short term. Anything less than a year is considered short term. And then there could be a long-term international assignment, and that's typically somewhere between 2 and 5 years. Those are sort of different, or it could be a permanent transfer altogether. So I worked with the oil company. I did a lot of work for an oil company previously, and they usually did a lot of those rotational assignments, 3 months on, 3 months off.
What do companies offer their employees to entice them to move to a different country?
Yeah, well, it does depend on the type of assignment and also on the level of the employee within the company, if they're very high level or just a, entry level employee. But it often means a raise and a promotion, or or raise or a promotion, or both. And then in addition to that, companies always want to cover any costs that are involved in moving that employee and sometimes the family to the overseas location. And so, for example, if somebody goes just for a year, short term, they may just treat them like a business traveler and pay for the hotel, reimburse for the hotel, reimburse for a rental car, and pay them a per diem for their meals or whatever. But if you're talking about an upper management level employee that's going for 3 to 5 years, bringing the family, those those benefits can be really, really comprehensive. And in that case, the employer often has an agreement with a relocation management company to sort of manage the whole process and also track costs.
Uli, can you give examples of some of these benefits you're talking about?
Yes, so for example, everybody would get immigration assistance. That is typically provided by an international law firm that specializes in immigration, and they would handle things like the visas and the work permits for those employees so they can be legally staying in the new country and employed in the new country. They will, almost everybody will also get tax assistance. If you're paying income taxes potentially in more than one country and all your benefits for the move are being taxed, it gets really, really complicated. So they all get assistance of a tax firm. But then other benefits will really depend on the type of assignment. So let's say a long-term international assignment, uh, people will often get a house hunting trip. That means they will pay for the whole family to go to the new location, stay for maybe a week, take a look at areas, neighborhoods. It's also called a recon or a look-see trip sometimes. Then there's the move of the household goods, and typically employees get a small shipment of their personal belongings, clothing, computers, that type of thing. That is an air shipment because they will need that right away. But then furniture and everything else is shipped surface, which can be with a boat or with a truck, depending on where they're going to and from. And that is extremely expensive. And it can also take a really long time because of customs and, so forth. So sometimes companies, rather than paying for the shipment of the furniture, will just give the employee a one-time lump sum of money and say, you use that and buy some new furniture in a new location. They will often get temporary housing in a furnished apartment, either if they haven't found a home yet when they first get here, and then also, if their furniture hasn't arrived yet. And then some additional benefits could include a relocation allowance. That's like a one-time sum of money to cover any miscellaneous expenses that might come up. Monthly cost of living allowance if the host country cost of living is higher than in the home country. There could be a hardship allowance if to sweeten the pot for somebody who's going to a desert or whatever. There's often a rental allowance to cover the families or the employees' rent. They will get a rental car. They will get the costs for the family to travel here for their final move, sometimes to even go back home once a year or whatever. Private school tuition for the kids if that's necessary, language training, cultural training. So it can be just numerous, and those expenses really add up. So, and then destination services, and that's the type of support that helps the assignee find a permanent home, schooling for the kids, and get settled into the new area. And that's what I've been doing for the last few years. I've been providing destination assistance to folks coming to the Chicago area. And so that I would do an area tour to familiarize them with different neighborhoods. We talk about schools and then maybe tour some different schools, private versus public. And then the whole settling in process, which would include, getting applying for a social security number, for your driver's license, opening a bank account, getting hooked up with local groups to get settled into the community, find out about the hospitals and so forth. And then obviously the rental assistance, where I've helped them find a long-term rental. If it's a family, they always will want a single family to rent a single family home and negotiate a long-term lease. Usually I do that with the help of a local real estate agent. And then help them, get connected with utilities and renters insurance, and then we'll do a move-in condition of the inventory, the condition of the property at move-in, which basically then they have proof to show when they move back out what condition the property was in. So they get their security deposit.
Uli, what about when you have a client moving to a location and it's more of a long-term job they're looking at or looking to transfer to, do they typically buy a home or lease a home?
Well, about 90 plus % will end up renting a home or leasing a home. Employees who move permanently to a new country, so they plan then on just staying there and becoming localized, that is called in the relocation lingo. They will sometimes rent for the first year and then buy a home. But most of them come for, a shorter time period, like 3 years or 5 years. And the companies really don't want them to buy a home because, one, buying all the closing costs, and then again, having to sell and all that is just a very cumbersome process. So they typically want them to rent, and they would reimburse them often give them a rental allowance, which is designed to reimburse them for the cost of the rent. So 90 some % will rent. And so the lease itself then can be either in the employee's name, and then the employee makes the payments and the company reimburses them, or it could be in the company name too. And the company actually then makes the payments, or the relocation company makes the payments, and a company representative would sign the lease. But whether it's a corporate lease or the employee signs the lease, the companies usually want to protect themselves in case they transfer this employee again during the term of the lease. And so they always want a diplomatic clause inserted or be part of that lease. And the diplomatic clause stipulates that they could break the lease without penalty in case they get transferred again during the term of the lease.
In the negotiation process, do you find that difficult to have the landlord accept that clause?
Well, if it's if the market, if there's very limited inventory and there's a lot of demand, it's really challenging. So, but I would try to negotiate a compromise. For example, the diplomatic clause could be effective after the first year of the rent, or after the first year of the lease, or they could have to pay a 2-month or 3-month penalty in order to break the lease. The companies just don't want to be on the hook for 2 years or 3 years of payments.
I can understand that completely. In looking at your experience, I know you've worked with many clients. Does one client or one case study stick out in your mind that you could share with us briefly?
Yeah. A good one would be a good example would be a family that I helped here to come to the Chicago area last year. They moved from Sao Paulo, Brazil, and his name was Eduardo. The employee was Eduardo. He was a high-level vice president at a multinational company that is headquartered in downtown Chicago. And then his wife, Renee, was a stay-at-home mom. They had 3 kids, a 5-year-old girl, and then 2 boys, 10 and 12. And they came for a 5-day house hunting trip in July of last year. The goal was to rent something for August occupancy. And they wanted to, so the kids could start school right away. They wanted to look at different areas to find a house to rent. And the biggest considerations were, and those are always the biggest consideration is typically the school. So that was number one on the list. And then the other really big one was he didn't want to have a long commute. 20 minutes, on the train was sort of his target. Or 30 minutes or less. I got them to go up to 30 minutes. And they wanted to be in the near west suburbs. They wanted to find a house for rent within with at least start date in mid-August. So the kids could start, and then there was a $6,000 a month budget. So I contacted a real estate agent that I usually work with, and there were actually quite a few homes for rent at that time that would fit their needs. And on the second day, we found the perfect home, and it was in Elmhurst, which is a suburb, really close, western suburb of Chicago. 20-minute train ride to the city. The house was in walking distance to the school. Excellent school district, really safe neighborhood. And it was also in walking distance to the train station. So it was ideal. They were able to get a lease with a mid-August start date. They went back home. The company then signed the lease, processed all the payments, and they went back home and packed up the kids, packed up the furniture, and they arrived in mid-August. And the company then decided to pay for rental furniture so they could move into the house right away. Until their furniture arrived 3 months down the road, and the kids could start school right away. So it was very, very complicated, lots of little details about utilities and that they couldn't hook up from Brazil and so forth, but it all worked out and it all ended well. So it was a great story, and they were very happy.
So the whole process can be very complicated.
It can be very complicated. A lot of times, like their utilities, for example, they cannot they have to show up in person to get electricity hooked up if they don't have a social security number yet. There's all sorts of medical records that the kids need for vaccinations and so forth for schools. It's just numerous things, but that's what I take care of to, make sure, because they don't know what they don't know.
That's true. That's true.
Local processes.
So what do you think real estate agents need to know to work effectively with international assignees?
Well, it's important to know, one, they are usually really, really good tenants and a very good credit risk, but they do not have U.S. credit established. They do not have a social security number yet. They will apply for a social security number right away, but even if they already have it, there's nothing that will show up for a credit check or a background check. And if they don't have it yet, they couldn't even be run. What they typically have is a letter from their employer that verifies their employment and their income. They can show a visa that they are eligible to stay in the U.S. and to work here. And their income is usually very substantial. Then they should also be aware that, the lease process is not always very straightforward. The company may want that diplomatic clause in the lease. They usually do on a long-term assignment. They may want a longer-term lease because people don't want to move. If they're only here for 3 years, they want to have the kids in the same school and stay in the same home. And then if the company signs the lease, that could take a longer time for that to be processed, for a representative to actually sign off. Could take up to a week. And then the initial payment could take up to a week too. And so, or, depending on the situation. And so knowing that, and then setting the right expectations with the landlord or with a listing agent, that is really, really critical. to help it go smoother.
So if you're a real estate agent or a broker and you want more business, either domestically or internationally from, relocation services, how do you put yourself forward and pick up more business?
So, education is really important to educate yourself what the special needs are of these people. If it's a domestic relocation, then a lot of times those would be buyers. If it's an international relocation, those folks would typically be renters. They may turn into buyers down the line if they move permanently. So getting education, joining industry groups, for example, Employee Relocation Council is a good group to join. That has like all different types of relocation providers. And their website is worldwideerc.org. You find lots of information there. Really becoming an expert in your area is important, where you don't just know the housing market and prices, but you also know the schools, the daycares, the healthcare facilities, everything that somebody new to the area might need to know. If you're working with people that come from a different country, being aware of cultural differences is important. They will not know what they do not know. And so, sometimes anticipating some questions. And then there may be language barriers. So, it's also important that folks use just sort of straightforward language. Don't use industry jargon. Maybe ask clarifying questions to make sure they understood everything. Even though, they're very, very intelligent people, but there may be a little bit of a language barrier. So be aware of that. And then finding a local destination services consultant like me, you can look on LinkedIn, for example, to see if there's somebody and just contact them and say, I would be happy to help you work with your clients. I always look for realtors that I can work with. So that's another way of finding that business and specializing in that business.
Uli, you've given us a great deal of information today, and we really appreciate your wealth of knowledge and hope to have you back as a guest some other day with Global Property Pros. Thanks again for everything, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Oh, you're very welcome. It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for joining in on today's episode of RealtyCast Global. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast to be notified when new episodes air.